Hello and welcome to the Young Film Academy podcast, the essential podcast for teenagers looking to find their way into the creative industries. My name is Dan Allen. I'm joined by Ellen Thomas. How's it going, Ellen?
Hi, Dan. I'm doing well. Yeah.
Excellent.
I'm ready to dive into the past.
Now we're talking.
Let's jump in the time machine.
Yeah, we're in ocean. We're by the ocean of time.
Yeah, we go in the submarine.
Yeah.
Our guest today is Annie Sulzberger, who was head of research on The Crown for the entirety of its run. Other credits include The Good Shepherd and The Iron Lady, and she is also a screenwriter herself. But yeah, she specialises in historical research for film and TV, and she's going to tell us all about The Crown and why that is such a special show.
Absolutely. So, without any further ado, welcome to the podcast, Annie. How's it going?
Oh, it's going very well. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me on.
We're very excited to have you.
So, Annie, your perhaps your most well-known credit is as the head of research on The Crown, the Netflix TV show. But we spoke a little bit before about that this wasn't really an official title in the film industry. Can you tell us how this came to be your role, or yeah?
So you're exactly right. It's often not its own department. Often screenwriters will bring in a researcher who works with them up into the point of production, and they sort of disappear and move on to another writer who's working on another project that needs that kind of research. And most departments have their own kind of junior member of their team who often manages that research. So you might have someone in set design who is making sure that they know what a building looks like in 1982, and they can help replicate that in the production designer's work. This was very different because Peter Morgan relies so much and adores so much the research in his projects. He tends to write historical drama. So we were really part of his script team. Instead of having a writer's room, which many programs do have, it tends to be a bit more American in that system than British. You often have auteurs who write all 6 episodes, let's say, of a TV show in Britain. Whereas in America, you often have a showrunner who writes the pilot and then brings in a whole host of writers to continue that season and work together. Peter had a researcher. And so when I joined, I was the only full-time researcher. We had a part-time researcher, and then we had a kind of script editor and a script assistant type and a producer. It was a very small group, and we worked out of Peter's home. And then when we realized, I think partially because I went a little bit insane in series 1, because, all the directors want to tap into this research and all the actors want to tap into it. And why wouldn't I hand it over to all the heads of department as well to help them, cast the choir boys that have to sing in Westminster Abbey for Elizabeth's wedding and so on and so forth. So we realized when I was working very long shifts on the show and had to be in kind of 2 places at once that we needed to expand this team. And by series 3, I think series 3 is when I took over as head of research, the show was successful enough to say, hey, this is clearly a demand. All these departments, all the actors, all the directors, they want to tap into this research, and why not have one central hub for it so that people aren't erroneously Googling, looking at Wikipedia and finding that unfortunately that wasn't correct information given and so on. So we expanded our team. We often had people who were maybe more on the visual research side of things, so working during production and pre-production with our team, people working with the editors as well. And I mean, on things such as what were double yellow lines around in 1964, because we have this scene down the Mall and we need to know if we need to erase it. So it was stuff that basic and really important. And it was great because we didn't have to undo work. That was probably one of the most important things. So by the end, I mean, I had a team of 5 researchers full time, some of whom were brought on for, in series 5 and 6, we had Al Fayed's story. So we wanted a fluent Arabic speaker who could tap into archives in Egypt and other places, who could read through national newspapers that we couldn't, and expand the range of our research. And that was incredibly useful. And again, they would head off to set deck and say, nope, these lamps are more Moroccan than they are Egyptian. Could you please look at these examples and see if we can make something from that? So it became incredibly important part of the show.
Yeah. And how do you think it changed the show, having research like so much at the core of it and such a focus? Like, how did it set it apart from other shows who maybe didn't have that?
I think people felt it pretty much from the start. That's the sense I get. This sort of texture of history felt quite evident from the start, and a lot of people would watch it simply because it transported them. We obviously, Peter Morgan as the showrunner and writer made editorial choices. Absolutely, this wasn't a documentary, but I think knowing that there was a robust research team at the heart of it, people often say we got something wrong. No, we chose to deviate from that fact. And that may be partially because we didn't trust the sources on that. So kind of what was true in quotes, I think there may have been an argument whether or not that was indeed accurate. We uncovered an enormous amount that other newspapers hadn't, or other sort of archival works hadn't put together. That was another thing that quite irked me about people saying they watched the show and Google it as they watched. We didn't rely on Google. Are you kidding me? We went to the National Archives. We did interviews with dozens of former staff members. Come on, guys. We're a team of 5. Trust us. Our investigative work was a bit better than Google and Wikipedia. So a lot of what people, particularly the newspapers that tended to write articles after The Crown season dropped on Netflix, and they binged it very quickly. They said, we got these things wrong. Unfortunately, we just had better research than they did. And we didn't get anything wrong. We just were, their research was most likely done back when that story occurred. So let's say, you did something on Princess Anne's kidnapping. Well, they probably just looked at the sources that were published in the 70s on that. But actually, if you look at the stuff published in 2020, where more files have opened up, like we did, then, sorry, I chose an example that we didn't cover for that exact reason. But it's that sort of additional investigative work that we did that, unfortunately, many of the critics weren't privy to.
Yeah. And I mean, because you said it's not a documentary, what are like your goals as a researcher? Is it historical accuracy, or is it finding like the story and the emotion in the research?
So it's both. I mean, the way that I believe our function as a team was, our primary goal was to provide Peter with all of the information we could find. We curated it based on dramatic writing. So we're presenting you the story because we think there's great emotional depth to it. Charles going to Aberystwyth University. A lot of people would not have cared. They would have just focused on the investiture because it's the kind of glamorous ceremonial aspect of that episode. But no, for us, it was this relationship with the teacher. So we got the teacher's book, which was in Welsh. He was a Welsh teacher. We had it translated. We got in touch with this teacher's daughter. The teacher's still alive, but he wasn't in a state to talk to us. And she was able to ask him questions on our behalf. And I don't think if we hadn't been given the kind of free range of presenting the stories to the showrunner, not saying you have to do this, but simply saying, wow, this really surprised us. Do you want us to dig into this further? Look at this great relationship where it's the first time and maybe the only time that Charles ever has or could have possibly had a kind of deep and meaningful relationship with a very middle-class, normal man. That to us felt like it ticked the dramatic boxes and the historical boxes too, which is you'd like to uncover unknown stories if you're going to present this. Otherwise, you would probably just do a documentary. They were born here. They lived through these events and so on and so forth. I mean, I remember one historian in absolute shock that we didn't cover the World Cup win in '66. You know, do you think the Queen watched football? Do you think, I mean, did she play in it? Like, was there anything in which it impacted her daily life? I didn't buy that it was a meaningful moment. Whereas, you know, Philip's interest in science and engineering and technology and advancement meant that, let's look at the Apollo landing. I wonder, even if we don't know if he watched every moment of it, it's incredibly indicative of his love of scientific progress and his fascination with the kind of theology and conservation and advancement. And he was writing essays throughout the 70s and 80s on the subject. So that to us felt like an event where, yes, he did not go into space. He did not even work in NASA. But it was a great coming together of a historical moment for all the world. And something that drew out his own personality and his interests.
Yeah. I was going to say, it seems to me there's two levels to research in a way, right? There's almost the finding of the texture. So it's like we already know that we're going to have some scene between these two people. Okay, well, what would they have been wearing, or like where would this meeting have taken place? But then you've also got, as well, by the sounds of it, this formative aspect of the research, which is absolutely at the center of something like The Crown, where you're in a way finding what story threads and what aspects of these people's lives are important enough to make the main plot threads, which is, you know, it's storytelling. It's finding the story, which are those two things different? Are the textures of things different to you to like the bulk of what's going to make up the story?
I think they are different. I think they're just different steps, really. So we start with your latter example, right? We built timelines, epic timelines that were all color-coded. I mean, nerd out, you know, big time. Every leading character had their own entries so that you understood what they were up to in their personal and professional lives. But at the same time, we have world events and domestic events. So Wilson's election here, you know, something maybe that Gorbachev did there. You know, those examples are not in the same timeline, but Khrushchev. And we were able to then look at it and go, oh, these two things really, if we combine these two things, then we can draw out a theme. So the best example that I use often, because I'm honestly obsessed with this storyline, is the Queen's relationship with the Reverend Billy Graham. I'm from America. I could not believe that up until his death, which was only a few years ago, he was still returning over and over again to preach privately to the Queen in Sandringham. I grew up thinking he was this very American version of an evangelical Christianity. The kind of shoutiness that I didn't think any Anglican would particularly get along with. And that passion and that sense of commitment to faith clearly struck a chord with Elizabeth, with the Queen. Sorry, I'm still so used to calling them
first name basis.
And so I was fascinated with that. And I think Peter would agree, somewhat obsessed with it. And so I started to look at the timelines, and that was around the time his visits to the UK, which were, I think, 1954 to 55, and then he came back again in 56, 57, I think. They were around the time that the Duke of Windsor's Nazi papers were about to be published. And so we knew that the Billy Graham storyline needed to be told, but we weren't quite sure if it was a full episode. So when we found these two events, all of a sudden we thought, okay, he is the conduit through which we discuss the forgiveness of her uncle and if she is capable of forgiving him. And so in most of these episodes, you'll have an A and B thread that are combined intentionally because they draw out a theme. And that was a great example, I thought, where, Billy Graham came to Britain because he wanted to revive faith in a very altruistic way. He felt that the war and the British commitment to war had cost them their faith. That by the time peace came, everyone was exhausted. Austerity was extremely difficult, probably more difficult post-war, because you don't have the energy of wartime anymore, that we're all in this together. All of a sudden, you're trying to claw back your life. You still can't afford food. There still isn't meat available. You still have clothing rations. Mm-hmm. And he felt that faith, the loss of faith, was a consequence of the dedication of the Brits in war. So he came in a hope of helping revive that and bring it back to them as a show of appreciation. It was incredibly altruistic in his mind, whether or not you want to read that cynically. And I just loved that aspect of it. So for him to be the person she chooses to discuss whether or not she has the capacity as a Christian to forgive what she sees as a treacherous uncle, I just thought was an extraordinary coming together. Yeah. And that was really our job. Our job was to dig as much as we possibly could we used to be called the crown jewels, the research team. and that was sort of what we were trying to do. We were digging for gold, right? We were digging for the stories that documentarians wouldn't find interesting because they don't move the chronology of the monarchy along.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where do you even begin? Like, you've mentioned like these timelines and stuff. Like, how do you map out how you're going to do the research?
I feel like I'd just be Googling documentaries on this era, which obviously I assume is not going to be that fruitful for the kind of depth you guys need to go to.
Well, we did. We would build up. We had this wonderful video archivist, Victoria, she worked on like the Churchill war rooms. She's, by the time she got to us, she'd had a career of 30 years. Okay. And she was able to find us an enormous amount of footage that not only helped spawn, our research ideas, but also would go into the show and also over to the other departments to help them know what a building looked like in 1942 and so on. So she was incredible, and that was very useful. The number one thing I would say was we had to really learn who to trust. That was much easier, I suppose, back in the early seasons. So, I mean, newspapers back then had their slants, but it wasn't to the point of, kind of Murdoch years and beyond. Mm-hmm. So you tended to be able to say, okay, if it's in, the Times of London, if it's in the Telegraph, if it's in the Express in 1958, it's likely that it happened as they've described it. That obviously shifted from the 60s onwards, and primarily I would say the 80s onward. We had to be very cynical and skeptical about what we were reading. And, we had legal notes on the show, so I had to feel very confident that we can move forward in various areas, particularly defamation and libel. So we learned about which biographers are interested in kind of hagiography, like they want to be in with the palace, and thus they're going to present a very glossy version of an individual or the royal family in general. Which biographers tended to take a more objective tone, and everything was read like this. So essentially, if we footnoted everything. It was very academic in that way. Mm. You had to know the tone, the slant, the background of that book and of the author. So we would get original documents, so primary sources from the National Archives. That was particularly helpful for cabinet minutes. Those are all available online, so you could say, okay, in this scene, I believe that Churchill's cabinet would be talking about this because it's in the minutes from around this month. And again, with that, you might try to tie it in to something you're discussing in the show in general. And I mean, we did a ton of interviews. Season 1 was much harder. There was only one person alive in the Churchill administration and private office.
Yeah.
So we spoke to her, and that was amazing.
Job done.
Got easier as we went along. Job done. Yeah. Okay, that's it. But it got easier as we went along, and that was very useful. Civil servants were very helpful because civil servants, they stay on regardless of, the government in charge. So when a prime minister arrives at Downing Street, they're greeted by the civil servants who were there serving the past government. So we had a few who we spoke to who were there during Wilson, Heath, and beyond, into Thatcher. And that was really useful as well. They also, given their nature, tend to be a bit more neutral and objective. So they don't have a loyalty necessarily that they're going to broadcast when you meet them. And those were really interesting. Those were great for character notes. What are Philip, for example, used to put his hands in his pockets and stretch them, and it really annoyed the sort of seamstress of Buckingham Palace because they had to keep sewing back in these pockets. But that was a kind of tension thing, right? And when you find out those little details from the people who worked for them, because many people aren't going to write that in a book.
Yeah.
But for our actors, Matt Smith, for example, when he learned that, he's like, I love that. He's just so tense. He's like trying to figure out what to do with his hands, and he's shoving them in so vigorously that he's ruining his jackets. And little moments like that, I think, were very useful to get from interviews. So it was a wide-ranging thing. But your question, where do we start? We start primarily from printed resources because unless the palace or any of the individuals discussed had issued some sort of correction or sued the source, so you can sue a book for, an author for defamation, we knew that more or less there was something to be substantiated in there, and we could use it as foundation. But when we reached certain areas where we felt like there was a slant or someone was being someone's mouthpiece, you get that a lot with the Diana years, then we often would triple, quadruple substantiate with other sources.
I think if it was me, I would end up in so many rabbit holes.
Yes.
Like, did that happen a lot? Did you embrace the rabbit holes, or did you develop techniques for
the moment you said rabbit holes as well, my brain went to conspiracy theories. So it's like, I wonder how many series of The Crown you have to do before you go, wait, are they all lizard people? And you sort of end up in that rabbit hole.
Exactly. No, the rabbit holes are real. Billy Graham was my rabbit hole, I would say. And I became really obsessed with trying to verify the accuracy of the Lisbon papers, the Duke of Windsor Nazi papers, because it felt so conspiracy. So I spent a good 2 weeks just looking at how the microfiche got from Germany of these files, to the Allied historians. And that I felt I really needed to do that because I don't want us going on record saying, he was either a Nazi pawn or he had agreed to some sort of strategy with the Nazis to put him back on the throne. That felt like our first sort of conspiracy territory.
That's a really big thing.
So I went down that rabbit hole, and those were on the same episode. So I think if you asked Peter today, he would probably say, oh yeah, that was when Annie went insane. But I felt very strongly that I needed to understand both sides of this story, the A and B threads. I had I would say in the first few months of people joining our team, we train you out of rabbit holes.
Okay.
And a lot of that is about saying, do you know enough to confidently present this to Peter or to confidently put this research to a director? Yes, you would always like to know more. Always. But at a certain point, we have to move on. Yeah. And oftentimes you would find that new research related to that subject would reveal itself in a month or 2 or 10 months because we might just end up getting in touch with the right person. So we would constantly be updating our research. The number of updated documents we had on the show that were just constant running, we'd say we're leaving this open as a Google Doc because we're going to continue to add new information to it. The BBC Panorama episode, for example, was one because we were ahead of the Dyson report in figuring out where Martin Bashir must have lied and how that happened. And we were able to update it as more and more information from the Dyson report came out. And then when the Dyson report was fully published, we sat there and verified our findings. And I'm very proud to say we were.
That's literally amazing. I mean, so do you get prepared like a whole roster of like, these could be main plot threads, these could be main plot threads, and then it's about sort of working through them, choosing what are going to be your I think, because you mentioned terminology of like A plots and B plots. Is that what the next step once you sort of find, once you've sort of done your research and you've managed to verify it and check it's accurate? Is that what the next step is?
Yeah. So I would say the early steps are we have this massive master timeline, and we sit down with Peter and we say, God, this is so many years ago. So I started in 2013, I think. And we would say, hey, if we're sticking to a kind of prime ministerial term, so series 1 is Churchill, then here are some major events that happen, and then here are some other kind of interesting stories. Now, the nice thing is Peter's a very well-educated man. And he, for example, he was the one who said, I remember, the Great Smog of 1952. Let's dig into that and see if it coincides with maybe any sort of political crisis moments for Churchill. Let's see how it affected Elizabeth, and so on and so forth. So he would often bring moments to us to dig into. But we would also say, hey, there's this great moment where Churchill's presented with a portrait, and it seems like he's very upset by it. Should we dig into that a little bit more? And so it was very much a conversation. And then from that, we would start to sort of refine our document. So, in the case of the Churchill portrait, it's how was it commissioned? Who painted it? And what was the reception? Mm. And then if we felt there was a story there, it was, are there any descriptions of the dynamics between the painter and the sitter? Mm. What are the commonalities in their life? They both lost a child. Okay, that's a beautiful moment for a scene. What happened to the painting? Clementine Churchill burnt it because she knew it would haunt her husband. But she burnt a piece of art that did not belong to her. It belonged to the House of Parliament. So, and how did she burn it? There are 3 different versions of that story. And so in that case, you might say, well, 3 have been published. Let's choose the one that fits our drama the most. And that might come down to the director saying, we have this beautiful setting of checkers. I want her to burn it outside. Does that really matter if she burnt it in a, incinerator or in a pyre? Probably not. She burnt it nonetheless, and it wasn't her right to do so. So we have those sorts of discussions. And then it changed, over the years because obviously Peter remembers the 70s, 80s, 90s, and so on a bit better. So he has a lot more in his head than we did in the early season.
Yeah. So you're sort of almost like, leaning on more sort of personal references of his, would you say, when you get into those later series, or in the sense of more for just the detail, the textual stuff?
I think it was, this is going back a time. That's amazing. It's amazing. I think I haven't worked on this show for 2 years, or nearly 3. There were many events that he just knew very well, and he also knew what he didn't want to cover again. Sure. So when Diana died, he wrote The Queen, and we didn't obviously want to take her death from that perspective again. So that in that moment, we realized if we want to look at the Muhammad al-Fayed version of this perspective, then we need to see him in much better in this previous series. She and Dodi will die in series 6, but if we just introduce Fayed then, we won't care about the loss of the father. So thus was born, Fayyad's backstory in series 5. And because we were able to look ahead at future series and write towards that, we knew it was going to be 6 series. We knew it was going to end in 2005. Everyone was guessing when it was going to end and thinking we were going to cover Harry and Meghan. And I kept my mouth shut, but nope, we were ending with Charles and Camilla's wedding. So we were able to really plan for that and decide when we need to meet characters to make them matter to us.
Yeah.
And it was an interesting example of this is Aberfan in series 3, which was the Welsh mining disaster where all of the cast off of the coal flooded a school and killed 100 people plus. That was a really difficult one for research. But what was interesting is Peter thought everybody knew that story. And I'm American. His sort of head of editorial is Irish. And we just put our hands up. Never heard of it. And so that was a moment where it was very useful to have a sort of diverse, even if just nationality, group of people working with him. Because we were able to check his assumptions about what part of history is very well known. And I think with Aberfan, I would imagine the majority of people, even in this country, did not know the full story of that. So I think he would have probably passed it over.
Yeah, I mean, sort of listening to you speak, I'm thinking about how, because I've watched the show with my parents and they're, I assume, like similar age to Peter, and they know so much just from like living through that. But then it's also this really interesting take that The Crown has as like little windows into really personal elements of like these historical figure stories that actually tell you so much about them. And it's just, it's very interesting.
But what's interesting, I mean, one of the hard things just in that vein is people think they remember history correctly.
Yeah.
And that was something rather frustrating with the latter series, is a lot of people's memories about these events were incredibly fallible, as they are. So when we would present a version of it that was rigorously fact-checked and came from, an almost investigative reporting place, we were told we were wrong, or that's not how I remember it. Well, unfortunately, that is how it happened. And I found that really interesting, that we had to not only counter this criticism of taste, oh, you shouldn't go this far into our lived memory. We actually had to counter fallible memory. And it's one of my issues as well. When we hired new people, I sort of would review the various options of printed resource material. There's a big difference between a biography, an autobiography, memoirs, and diaries. Diaries are epically useful. People go home, they write the event that day. It's fresh. It's often without a lot of kind of editorializing. I did this. I sat down with this person. They said X. And tomorrow morning I want to do this. It's quite factual. Alistair Campbell's diaries are incredibly useful, and a lot of civil servants did those as well throughout the Wilson, Heath, and Thatcher years. Biographies are often written when someone is dead or they're at the height of their fame, right? And they're relying on information from that person, so you have to take that into account. Autobiographies are even more difficult because you're going to present yourself a certain way, whether you realize it or not. And memoirs are the hardest because there's no right way of remembering an event. There is no truth when it's 30 years later. When police need a witness statement, they know after 5 minutes it's not going to be valid, probably. You take in the environment around you, your heart's racing, you add in some flair that you don't even realize you've added. The trauma of something might force you to get little details wrong, and those details matter. So memoirs are tough. I remember when Spare came out, Prince Harry's memoir, and we read it, obviously. It was quite late in our process, so we were already filming the final season of the show. We read it, and it was useful in some ways, but we couldn't take it as historical fact. It's one person's version of it, and that is not to say that I don't respect the fact that he wrote the book and he wanted to get his version of events down. But I think when you write about a fight that happened when you're 10 years old, let's not pretend that it may not be exactly accurate, and that the three people, let's say, in that argument, even back if you had the argument and asked them to go into a different room and write down their version of events, those versions would all be different. So you just have to read through everything and have that basis of information. I've acknowledged this book has come out. I have read the contents of the book. I do not have to follow this as if it is historical record.
Mm. Do you think it was almost inevitable in a way that, like, I feel like obviously the closer you get to covering a modern era or like things that people are sort of remembering more, that you're almost going to get pulled into the I'm trying to think what the right word is. It's sort of like, I don't know, the fight with the sort of the tabloids and sort of their recollection of things. Because the moment you're engaging into that sort of like the discourse or the space of like presenting a version of events, there are other people that did present their own version at the time that you're now on the stage with, in a way.
Absolutely. And the most important thing is to know by the 1980s who was whose mouthpiece.
Yeah.
So Richard Kay of the Daily Mail was Diana's mouthpiece. She called him constantly to get her side of the story across. And everyone had someone, really, of that generation, I would say. I'm not necessarily saying it would be of the Queen's generation, to speak to and to get out their side of the story, particularly when things got so incredibly gossipy. Oh God, the 80s were tough. I mean, really tough to research. And I had a really fascinating conversation. I won't say which newspaper, but they were interviewing me. They weren't meant to. They were interviewing a director, and the director had some details that she couldn't quite remember. So she said, "Hey, they're going to call you because I didn't want to get anything wrong. So I've asked them to call you to just verify something." And it was about Diana filming Phantom of the Opera for Charles for his anniversary present. Mm. And I was asked by the journalist what our sources were. We had two sources. We had one British newspaper, one American newspaper, and in addition, we had one of her good friends on camera saying that she had watched the film, this tape. And the response I got was, "Well, the newspapers, they could have just made that up." And I sort of lost it. I mean, very politely lost it. But I said, "Listen, newspapers provide us with a historical record. If you're saying that I can't trust any newspaper because of some people who decide essentially to embellish and enhance their stories, then we have a really big problem about how we record our history."
Yeah.
And I mean, that was my uber polite way of saying, "How dare you?" But it's true. I think that was the hardest thing about the 80s and 90s tabloid culture.
Yeah.
Was, as just a former art historian and at that point researcher, to now feel like there is not any foundation to the newspaper as historical record was really infuriating. And what we often did we would see if a story from the UK made it into an American or Australian paper, where there tended to be a little bit more rigorous kind of fact checking. If it came from the Daily Mail, did the Washington Post pick it up? Because the Washington Post would likely have tried to vet it again. So we tried to look at numerous sources to prop up the original reporting.
Yeah. You mentioned the art history is sort of your background. What is that? Where you trained? Did you go to university for that? Because it seems like you know a lot about story as well. I wondered if you could tell us about maybe what makes a good art historian, but also what are sort of the different educational background that you have.
So yes, I went to university in America and I majored in art history, and then I went to my master's program in London, which is one of the reasons I've been here for so long. I've been here for 20 years. And my area was 18th and 19th century British art. I particularly wrote frequently about caricature, which I loved because it is storytelling. It's political in nature. I quite like that aspect of it. I decided not to continue with education, get my PhD, because I felt listen, all academics are different, but I was looking at my final dissertation thinking, I think only 3 people will ever read this in my entire life. It's going to be the 2 people grading it, and maybe someone like me 20 years from now when they're writing their dissertation and they need something related to the subject. Yeah. And I just sat in front of my computer saying, who am I writing this for? And for me, it's just not how I wanted to communicate anymore. And I felt at that point, art history was going towards such a kind of a theory-based assessment, where I wanted to write about art and its relationship to society rather than this is a gender study of blah, blah, blah. I just didn't personally, I felt I was incapable of sort of putting modern sensibilities onto these works. And I just wasn't really interested. It's also a really difficult field. There are very few jobs where you get to actually put on exhibitions that affect people, right? Yeah. That draw people into the subject. And I had always loved television. It's interesting. It was around this time where my mother said, you watch television all the time as a child, but you watched it for world building. Like I wouldn't just watch anything. I watched things that drew me into a time and a place. And I was a huge sci-fi fantasy nerd, the stories that have that depth and texture. And I thought, okay, you know what? I'd like to see what I can do here. I had worked on one film between university and my master's program. My grandmother was a seamstress and taught my mom taught me. So I worked in the costume department at uni, and I worked as the costume researcher on a historical drama in New York, where I'm from. And I loved it. And I just loved digging into random things to the point where, the director would be like, hey, you nerd out. Can you look into this for me? And they had no researchers, right? There had been a researcher a year ago working with the screenwriter, but no one since then. So I ended up filling this sort of void just out of sheer excitement to be the weird nerd on the cast and crew list. And so I decided, okay, I'm in London. Enormous amount of shows and films get filmed here and made here and written here. And this is the heart of period adaptation. So let's see what I can do. And I happened to just meet a producer at the time. He was doing a film, which was my first Peter Morgan experience, called The Special Relationship for HBO. And it's about Clinton and Blair. And they had lost one of their researchers and needed someone in archive and research to just come along and help translate, some of the American stuff to the British director and then also build the archive up to use in the show. So I had not done that before, but I convinced them I could do it and I did it. And it was from there when I, met a producer who then put me forward for Strike Back, which was my next show, which was a counterterrorism show, which I spent many years on. And then when that came to an end, The Crown was starting, and it was the same production company. So I was asked to help Peter for 2 weeks. I think it was over 10 years. But it was great. I mean, when I hired people, I never looked at their academic credentials. I don't care. I asked them to take a really horribly dense and unentertaining piece of research. It was about the dam in Ghana that we very briefly mentioned in one of our episodes in season 2. And I asked them to make it into an entertaining 2-pager. Like I want to turn that page from the first to the second because you've adapted it so beautifully into a story suggestion. And that was how I hired people. And I think I would say it was a very successful group, and they were tenacious and, fastidious, but fundamentally just really interested in great storytelling. And they all had very different backgrounds. Some came from documentaries, some came from editorial script editing, others came straight from academia. So everyone had a very different background.
And do you think that role of a researcher, is that showing up in more productions, or because you mentioned costume, does it stay sort of in specific departments and it's not as much as a core kind of development tool?
I really wish I could answer that in the affirmative. Prior to The Crown, I remember going on sort of informationals. I would find out which production companies were making period dramas that, to me, felt like the essential need for a great researcher. And I would say, listen, I know how these things work. You pay for a couple of experts. They give you some info, but there are huge gaps in between. So you might be an expert in, let's say you're making War and Peace. You might have an expert in Russian culture, and then you might have of that time, and then you might have an expert in the language of the time, or what. But that's fine. You get a little bit here and there, but what you really need is someone to say, no, this extends to this field of expertise, and have to kind of come in and do a holistic review of the research. So I was pitching myself as the person to do that. Instead of paying experts an extraordinary amount of money to give you a small slice of the information you need, why don't you pay someone like me? I will get that information for free, which I always did. I'm still very proud of that. And I'm taking responsibility for interconnecting, right, all of this information for you, and making sure that there is a genuine vision of it put forward that can just be divided up. This goes to costume. This goes to the director. This goes to the actors. Hey, actors, these are the things that would have been really rude in 19th century Russia. Don't eat this way. Don't put your hands in your pockets. These are the kinds of things, where you need to understand the mannerisms of the time and so on. And I had one person say to me, this is very interesting. I will either call you tomorrow or never. And sadly, it was never.
Oh, no.
And a lot of people just couldn't wrap their heads around what I was trying to offer.
Yeah.
Which was really curated research, right? I would meet the specific needs, but ensure that there weren't any gaps in between. So what I loved about our team was, by the end, there was, no need for anyone to be Googling anything. They couldn't, if Set Deck was trying to find the tools needed to embalm a body in 1952 when the king was being embalmed, then we would not only find the tools, we would try to find the guy who did it. And I ended up finding the guy who was trained by the guy who did it, because the guy who did it was dead, who would come in and teach us how to use the kit. So that was really our function. When The Crown ended, I had hoped, because research did get quite a nice platform, Netflix was very keen on it. We have very lovely, wonderfully nerdy, erudite producers, and so they loved hearing about research. I had hoped that more TV shows and films would have invested in that. But it's still very fragmented, I would say. So, a screenwriter uses a researcher and then sort of discards them at a certain point, and then expects every department to get their own researcher, but the person is not trained to do this. So I think it leaves a lot of, hesitation over using the material that they find. I would love it. I would love it if every production company had a researcher on staff. They could work between various, projects that they're developing and pitching out. And when the projects are a go, great, you have the most knowledgeable human about this time, this place, these cast of characters. Let's move this along. And I think it would actually make things faster, to be honest.
Yeah.
That's my pitch, if there are any producers listening.
I was going to ask, where do you think they're the most useful, the researchers? So obviously in the development, it sounds like they're useful. In building the world, it sounds like they're useful. I always thought it'd be super handy as a director to have someone on set just pointing things out, just being like, not that cup.
Yep.
That cup is 10 years too early. Do you know what I mean? Like, and just sort of like spotting every last bit. Do you know what I mean? It's, I don't know. That feels like the last opportunity to have that person in, hopefully.
Absolutely. And I am buying what you're selling, sir, because I believe that there should be a researcher at every step of the process. I mean, you want to get as much of the world right in your script, because that is, no matter how much you think you can control other heads of departments or actors or directors, they're going to use it as the Bible and they're going to get going. So some people just want to research immediately and they fall into their own rabbit holes, and others will wait and say, oh no, I'm going to tap into this great team that's working here. So you can't always control how people sort of take off with the source material, with the script. So I would say that is really important, to get as much as you possibly can down.
Yeah.
But inevitably, because they should and they have the right to, and it's an important part of the process, directors have a say, heads of department have a say in how to adapt the script and to make it more visual. And locations might say, we can't find that place, or it costs too much to shut down Trafalgar Square for a day.
Yeah.
So let's see if we can change this room. So we are updating scripts until the day, really, and on the day. And your cup example, which made me feel very much like the Game of Thrones Starbucks cup.
I literally, oh my God, I almost mentioned that earlier, you know, when I was sipping my Pret or whatever it is, I literally was thinking to myself, we should talk about the clearly terrible research that went into the making of Game of Thrones, that they thought that, that they had Starbucks in Westeros, you know?
Listen, Westeros is a fantasy land. Who knows what franchises they have. So, I mean, that job is the job of the sort of continuity. So the script supervisor. And it's their job to look around and make sure those things aren't on stage. But we need to get there before the props department buys the cup, right? And what we used to do by season 2, and then it really became a robust document by season 3 when we had more team members, we would visually translate the script. So every single scene was put into a visual document, location, cast of characters. If we didn't have a picture of that person, or if it was a fictional person who was like a composite of multiple private secretaries, for example, we'd give you every private secretary, from which the casting department could then say, oh, interesting, they all have this similar look.
Gotcha.
Let's look for someone like this. If a picture didn't exist, we would give you a full description of, let's say, a room in Buckingham Palace that nobody is allowed to photograph. But some people over the years have said, oh, there's an avocado color scheme. You're like, Jesus, okay, well, I'm going to pass that on to the, to the set department. For example, one of the great details that we didn't end up using in The Crown, we sort of cut the scene, was when Charles proposes to Diana. He does it in his own nursery. And he does it, they don't celebrate with champagne, they celebrate with a constitutional drink that Lord Mountbatten taught them to drink. So, it's like lemon and, nothing says sexy marriage proposal, like getting your bowels going. I don't know, but it was one of those details which we put in the visual document, because who knows, if the director is looking for some levity in that moment, then easily that's there for them to choose from. And, it also shows you just how young she was. She wasn't like having a glass of champagne at her proposal. Yeah. So those details were all very useful. And then we had a researcher from in the last season. She had trained as a script researcher, but moved over to visuals because she just loved working on set. And she was there as often as we possibly could have her be. And she single-handedly at this point was managing the visual document. So she was on set and the director could say, I'd like to switch this with this. Is that okay? We want to add in a line. Is this something that Charles would say? Right? And she had enough experience where she could liaise with the script team and say, I've suggested this. Let me know if you think that's wrong. But to me, it feels true, et cetera, et cetera. So we had all of these steps taken care of, and then she went straight through into the edit. She was there for additional audio, so she was there for ADR. She was there for, like I say, hey, what do the stop signs look like in 1962? All right, I'll get that information for you. And so on and so forth. She was able to provide advice and kind of counseling on all of these stages of the shoot, pre-production, production, and the edit.
Yeah, that's so useful.
I know.
I wanted to ask you before we sort of move on to our final two questions that we ask everyone. It's like, where are you now, kind of work-wise? Because you've done this huge sort of stint on The Crown, and then what are you writing? Are you doing more research stuff? And like, how has that experience kind of shaped what you're sort of trying to work on now?
Well, I'm doing many things because the state of the industry is such that I have to hedge my bets. So I think it's officially called hustling. I'm hustling. I love doing research, but what I really wanted to do after 10 years on The Crown was write my own work. So I still write a lot of historical dramas. I work primarily in that space, and unsurprisingly. So I've written a World War II drama that was with Peacock, but unfortunately is no longer with Peacock. I'm working as the development producer and EP on Netflix, another big historical drama, sort of dynastic piece as well that they came to me with. So I'm not the showrunner. I'm just helping them kind of wade through the history and try to pull out the strands that are actually important and eliminate all of the noise. That is something you definitely learn how to do in this job. Not all history is of equivalent weight, right? And being able to say, unfortunately, that's just not as significant. It doesn't drive the character in the same way. It's a detail that you might get married to if you go down a rabbit hole, but when you're actually writing is weighing you down, those sorts of things. It was one of the great things about how Peter worked, because he was he highly respected research, but by distancing himself somewhat for it and allowing us to curate it for him, we might get married to certain details, but he would be able to say, that is not my story, right? And write in a simpler way because of it, in a less burdened way. But I'm also writing, I sometimes read articles and go, God, that's a good idea. And so I start digging in and I write pitches for various TV shows. I have a spy one out now, sort of based in I still have all my contacts from my Strike Back years, which was a counterterrorism show. So I was able to tap back into that network, which was great. And a legal drama. And it just really depends on the piece. I'm writing a very, very contained film, a historical drama as well. But it's about a very famous person, but only 5 years of his life, and anchored in one part of his character. So, I struggle with hour-and-a-half biopics to go from birth to death. I don't know that person by the end. It's too fleeting.
Yeah.
And so for me, taking that slice of something that exposes an aspect of someone's character that we don't know about, that's revelatory, and that more than anything is universal. I just think it has to affect all of us. Trying to find something that makes someone unique, I actually think is a problem. I think trying to find somebody that makes someone human and really relatable is my favorite thing.
Yeah.
When we can read a piece and go, wow, I cannot believe I share that with that famous person. Sorry, I can't say who it's about. I'm just trying to be.
No.
I think that's
fine.
Successful.
Yeah.
Immediately successful.
It reminded me of the was it the Steve Jobs film? What you were sort of talking about, because that obviously, quite bizarrely, that takes like 3 moments, or is it 4 moments? But they're all brief moments to try and capture. So it's not trying to do like the whole biopic thing, but that sort of did it quite nichely. And I think you're right. I think that is like a powerful way of capturing part of someone, because inevitably, if you are going to try and capture the whole of someone's life, then it goes one way or the other. I think you either somehow get it all in, or not at all.
Yeah, and
Yeah, and sort of trying to create a story of someone's whole life is really hard. You're kind of pushing it into a mold of a screenplay instead of sort of rooting out those good juicy
Absolutely.
bits.
And again, it's relying on this idea that everything is of equal weight. I can tell you, my teen years, nothing happened, right? I mean, if someone were to do a biopic of me, you probably get 2 good years worthy of anything.
Yeah.
And I think that's even true of very famous authors and actors and we just don't have lives that are full of monumental moments every year.
Yeah.
It's impossible.
Because
I loved The Dig, for example, like what you were saying about Steve Jobs, which was, I actually put off watching it because I thought, listen, I'm a history nerd. It's about Sutton Hoo, but like, really, it's a film about Sutton Hoo?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. I guess they're going to make archaeology interesting. It's not about Sutton Hoo. It's about this guy striving his entire life and finally having something to show for it. And it's about the slow death of a mother. That is just the event that brings them together. It's just the event that allows him to realize his kind of goal in life. And I was weeping in that film. And I just thought that was such a beautiful, focused, technically kind of biopic of both of them because they're historical figures. I thought that kind of work is really lovely and perfect for filmmaking, right? Succinct, focused.
I have to check that one out as well.
For sure.
Oh, it's very moving. Although I'm sure that now you're going to go, Annie, it was nice, but I'm going to cry. Give it a break.
Just before, the last couple of questions, I thought, I just wondered about when you're presenting that research. I know you mentioned talking about you had someone on set that would have this here's a complete document and it all being very visual. Because I was thinking, you could do lots of research, but if you're just going to hand someone a spreadsheet, that's going to be a shortcut, but is it the most engaging way? I don't know. Yeah. So how are you normally presenting the research, and does it differ depending on who you're handing it to?
Yeah, it absolutely does. Peter wanted to read documents. We would take a moment and we would try to be succinct and clear and concise, but it would have enough detail for him to go, yes, that is something I want to explore further. And then the documents became more and more micro. It would also, that would become sort of the foundation of a research package for the directors and the producers and the actors often, because it provided the most insight. One of the issues you can imagine with kind of the Diana 80s stuff onwards is, as I mentioned before, the source material can be questionable.
Yeah.
So we were there to stop some actors from engaging in that material. And by us providing the information and saying, we've scoured every book, here's the one we trust, but in addition, here are our documents that provide you with a really objective, concise version of your character.
Yeah.
Then it helped us. We didn't have that many moments where the actors were like, well, I believe X, and we had to undo that.
Yeah.
Which was really important. There's some revelations that may not be particularly palatable when you're playing that character. Elizabeth is a somewhat unemotional, unattached, absent mother to her first 2 children. That's a hard thing to play when you believe she is this, the greatest version of a monarch we've had. So it being able to back that up and provide that support early to the actor and saying, here's the character, warts and all. Ask us, let us know if you have any questions, was very useful. And then the visual stuff was incredibly important, let's say, for locations. So before you go out and just try to find a house, this is what it looked like in 1962. It looks very different. So, are you going to need VFX to dirty the building?
Yeah.
Right? In the post-war years. And here are all the interiors from that year. It was renovated in 1968, but we want to get that tattered kind of version. So it was incredibly useful to be able to locations they did their research. So I have to say we were often behind them.
Oh,
we
really?
were ahead. And then they're like, no, we've already found all those images. And all that was very, very.
Is that when you?
I think. I mean, I liked it.
Is that when you suggested that there should be one research team? It was after they started like to get ahead. You were like, I've got a new idea of how this could all work. Actually,
Exactly.
we will create one research team, and your guys' people will work
work for us. I mean, this is the thing: is the Crown was staffed with probably the smartest, most like mission-driven, focus group of crew. And I remember saying something at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival during a talk, and Martin Childs, who was our glorious production designer for the whole show, turned to me and was like, I got there first. I was like, oh God, I'm so sorry. I just took the credit for something you did. I'm sorry. I thought we gave you that information. They were already on such solid footing with their work. We were just there to help augment, and little things that you don't realize people don't know. We had a second AD who was casting Westminster Abbey Choir and didn't realize that it was really just all boys and like all men. There wasn't a female voice in there in the 1950s. So making sure that was right so that we didn't make errors was really useful, I think.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, so the last couple of questions that we ask all of our guests is... what were you doing during your teenage years that turned out to be useful? We obviously might get a short answer here. And then also, what advice would you give to that teenage version of you? Okay,
so I have a probably an inappropriate version and an appropriate version. The inappropriate version is watching TV, which I feel like I don't need to tell kids to watch more television.
Maybe you do though, because they're moving on to even shorter form.
Maybe I do.
You're like, no,
I just
slow down and watch TV.
I loved watching film and television with my family and in every environment, and taking their, suggestions, and dipping in and out of cinema I would not have seen on the screen. But I would say the more above board version of that, so that you're not even more tied to your screens, is I was a dilettante. I just tried everything.
Okay.
Like I was a dilettante in my version of the positive version of that word.
Yeah.
And I still sort of behave like that to this day. I decided I wanted to fence. I just started taking fencing classes. It was in my 30s. Okay. I decided I wanted to fiddle. Did that. And it might not last, but I really feel like we should be inspired to pursue these whims, even if they are just that. So I participated in every part of my school. I did not do my homework. I always wanted to just try things and see how I would succeed at it, or fail. Potentially. But I wanted to meet communities and I guess just open up. I was a very gregarious and social being at that age, and I loved meeting other people who were passionate about weird things.
I love that.
Yeah. And then what is the advice that you would give yourself, your teenage self?
So one is revel in being nerdy. Whatever you like, go for it. Who cares? Nobody cares. And I think most people are more jealous that you're passionate about something and that they're lacking in that passion than they are judgmental of it. I think it really stems from a jealousy. And the other thing I would say is it's hard. It's really hard to make this piece of advice, because in Britain, when you go to university, you declare your major first. I went to university for astrophysics.
That's cool.
And I ended up in art history. And the way that my friend helped me make that decision was, he said, okay, if you have to take 17 physics classes, how do you feel about that? And I was like, I want to die. And he said, but if you had to take 17 art history classes, how would you feel? I was like, oh God, that'd be amazing. I learned about so many cultures. And that was it. Yeah. And what I realized is I loved science in storytelling. I was a sci-fi kid. I was not someone ready to go and live in the top of a plateau in Arizona to look at data. That was not what I was interested in. I was interested in the possibilities of sort of space and fantasy and that kind of storytelling. Yeah. So my advice would be, don't declare yourself one thing or the other too early. But I do think that is sort of hard, because at my university, I went to Brown University in the United States. You didn't have to declare until 2 years in. And so I was able to make that shift away from science. I still love science, but it's very much a passion. It is not a career for me. And I was able to make that shift over. And I suppose that advice, one part of that advice could be universal, which is feel free to have as many passions as you want. It doesn't have to be your career. You can separate out two things. And I just loved meeting all these young people who I brought into my team. I always hired young because I didn't want them to know the Diana years, the Charles years. I wanted them to come in completely new to this material without any bias. And there's still that energy and passion for all these new things. And I just hold on to that. Hold on to that as much as you possibly can.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Annie. It's been great talking to you. Yeah.
My pleasure.
It's been great advice as well. So.
My pleasure. Thank you guys so much.
Ellen, if you had to research one subject for the rest of your life, what would you research?
Oh, that's a good question. A lot of things are jumping out of me. And I remember in school when I studied history at A level, we did the witch craze,
ooh, yeah.
And it was super cool. I was very excited about studying that. But it became quite case study based. And, sometimes when the way something's taught can sort of suck the life out of it. But I would love to I would love to go back and really research into that from a more sort of social perspective of just the witch craze in whenever it was. I'm quite into gothic-y stuff.
I love that.
Yeah. What about you, Dan?
It's a good question. I mean, so my brain went to topics that I feel like you'd have there's be no end to them. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's always be more levels to it. So part of me wanted to go for something classical like the Bible.
Okay.
Because I feel like you could just keep peeling back corners and sort of finding new things to discuss or explore.
Yeah.
Or at least new interpretations. Alternatively, World War II.
Yeah. I'm quite interested in the Cold War.
Okay. Nice.
I'm really drawn to
Bit chilly, that one.
Yeah, I'd have to wear a coat. I really like that part of history, 20th century, late 20th century, kind of post-war. So maybe I can be be the prequel to your one.
Yeah, well, if we did all of our interests, we'd have a lot of bases covered.
Yeah.
We'd have sort of around 2000 and before, and then we'd be missing a chunk of time between sort of the year zero. Wait, I said around 2000 and before. I meant 2000 years ago and before.
2000. Wait, what do you mean? 2000 BC?
I guess what I'm saying is between the time of Jesus and World War II would be a big blind spot in our collective
Then we'd
history.
come in with the witches though, and
they
kind of span from 1500s to 1800s.
Yeah,
but we're missing sort of the 100s, definitely.
Yeah. So we just need someone else that's really interested in that, and then boom.
Yeah, and then we're sorted.
We could teach the world everything that's ever happened.
But yeah, what a wonderful conversation with Annie. I mean, really the crossover of history and storytelling, very insightful.
Well, that's what struck me actually, is just that combo of the writing, the research being the writing. Because as you and I know, what goes into writing a story or a script or a screenplay. A lot of it is deciding what to write about. It's choosing which character arcs are what you're going to focus on. Writing is about making choices. It's not just about writing words and dialogue. And that is happening with Annie and with her team.
Yeah.
with Rupert.
And I think that
Peter, sorry.
Something that Annie really stressed was that if you have a piece of history, the story's not already there for you. Those are just like events, and you need to pull out the story. And that's a really good skill to have.
Mm-hmm. No, 100%, 100%. Because I genuinely, I think I was in that slightly naive mode where I thought research, especially for something like this, is just about textural details, but it's not. It's like so much more.
Into it, yeah.
It's baked into it. It's the big. It's the meat. It's the bones that you put the meat on. It's the whole thing. When you're writing a historical piece, the whole thing is research.
Baking meat, making me hungry.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna have to bake a meat pie,
and then you've got your story.
And then we've got a story.
Do you have a question for me, Dan?
Yeah. Let me have a look. This question is from Chelsea. Chelsea says, I'm studying history and want to go into film. What should I do for university? Ooh.
You're going to put all of that decision on us, Chelsea.
Yeah, don't listen to us. That's step one. You've asked the wrong people.
I think
step two. You've asked the right people.
Yeah, I think looking at what you like about history is an important thing. Like what the different assignments you're doing, or the skills you're learning, what get you most excited, and seeing how they align to storytelling or areas of storytelling. What do you think, Dan?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what I would say, I always like to remind people that, especially if you're going to go to National Film and Television School, I'm assuming you're a UK-based student, no matter what area of film you go into, whether it's sort of directing, cinematography or whatnot, I know that NFTS historically have really liked students that came with different backgrounds. For instance, I've got a literature degree, which obviously more directly is looking at stories, but I always looked at that as part and parcel of my development to become a storyteller. So I think you can study history and still be a director, and you can teach yourself the creative parts. And maybe just choose a university as well that lets you choose multiple different from multiple syllabuses at once. So UEA, for instance, where I went, they would let you choose literature for your degree, but you could choose some film modules. And maybe a university that lets you do that is going to be advantageous to you.
Yeah, I think both me and Dan studied literature at university and chose to go into film afterwards. I think, Dan, you already had your sights set on film, but you wanted to do something different. And I think you're not limiting yourself by not choosing film as your first bit of education. I think there's always room to refine those skills, and because film is such a broad industry, you will develop skills that will be useful to you, whatever you choose.
Absolutely.
I'm trying to think of one that maybe wouldn't be so useful.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, most degrees, you could probably use them in film in some way.
Yeah.
Yeah, literally whatever you study. Events will still be useful. Business management will still be useful. Basically, just migrate to film. Study whatever. Migrate over, and you'll be fine. Anyway, thank you for joining us, guys. We hope you enjoyed, and do send your questions to podcast@youngfilmacademy.co.uk, and we will try to answer them on a relevant future episode. Thanks for joining.